Daniel pushed the mop slowly across the shining floor, his shoulders heavy after another long day. The building around him was huge, filled with tall glass walls, glowing screens, and the quiet hum of alien machines. He was only a janitor here, just a human worker who cleaned up after everyone else. The aliens in expensive clothes never even looked at him. To them, he was invisible, like part of the furniture. But inside his pocket, close to his chest, was a folded picture of his little daughter, Emily. Every time he felt tired, every time he wanted to drop the mop and give up, he touched the picture and reminded himself why he worked. Emily needed food, clothes, and medicine, and this job, no matter how humiliating, kept her alive. That night was quiet, too quiet, until the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Daniel froze, mop in hand, as a group of alien executives walked into the room. They were tall, elegant, and dressed in flowing robes with shining symbols on their collars, marks of their high rank. Their skin glimmered faintly under the light, their voices sharp and commanding. They were speaking in their native tongue, a language so complex that humans were never supposed to understand it. Daniel kept his head down, pretending to be busy with the mop, though his ears caught every word. The aliens didn't lower their voices. They thought the janitor couldn't understand them, and so they spoke freely, their words like blades. They laughed about humans, mocking them as weak creatures, only good for simple work like cleaning floors. One of them even said Earth workers were taking too much pay, and maybe it was time to cut them off, to make them suffer until they obeyed. Another joked about how funny humans looked when they begged for scraps. Their voices carried arrogance, and their laughter stabbed at Daniel's heart. His hand tightened around the mop handle, his jaw clenching as he listened. They were deciding the fate of people like him, of workers who needed these jobs to feed their families. They had no idea he understood every insult, every cruel plan. For years, Daniel had hidden his secret, buried it deep because it could only bring him trouble. But hearing them now, insulting not just him but all humans, something inside him began to burn. The aliens continued their talk, debating how soon they could announce the cuts, how little the humans could survive on before they broke. One of them sneered that humans would crawl back no matter what because they had nowhere else to go. Daniel's grip tightened. He looked at his reflection in the shiny floor, saw the sweat on his forehead, the tired lines on his face. He thought of Emily, her smile when she gave him a drawing she made at school, the way she whispered, "Good night, Daddy," every evening. If these aliens carried out their plan, she would suffer most of all. Without realizing it, Daniel stopped moving the mop. His silence made the aliens glance at him, only for a second. Then they dismissed him again, believing he was just another worker who couldn't even understand their words. Their voices grew sharper, talking about humans like cattle, resources to be used and thrown away. Daniel's heartbeat pounded in his ears. His whole life he had kept his head down, stayed invisible, never speaking out. But tonight, something snapped. He straightened his back slowly, standing taller than before, his mop still in his hand like a staff. The aliens laughed again, but the sound died the moment Daniel opened his mouth. In a calm, steady voice, he spoke, not in English, but in their language. The words flowed smoothly, perfectly, without hesitation. His accent was flawless, his tone sharp and controlled. The room froze. The executives stopped mid-sentence, their eyes widening as they turned toward him. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The sound of the janitor's voice, the voice they never expected to hear in their sacred tongue, was like thunder in the silence. Daniel's words cut through the air, repeating their plan back to them with exact precision, showing he had understood every insult, every detail. Their jaws dropped. One alien's hand trembled against his robe. Another's mouth hung open, unable to form a word. Daniel's gaze swept across them, no longer the silent cleaner, but a man who carried a fire in his chest. He told them their plan was cruel, that what they spoke of was nothing but a coward's act, and that humans were not blind, not deaf, not weak as they believed. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had been hiding too long, a man who knew his words could no longer stay buried. The silence grew heavier with every second. The aliens had always believed their language was a shield, a wall no human could climb. But here stood a janitor, mop in hand, who had just shattered that wall with a single sentence. They didn't know how to react. Anger, fear or disbelief. The room, once filled with their laughter, now belonged entirely to Daniel. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He didn't feel small. He felt the weight of every human worker behind him, the strength of his daughter's smile pushing him forward. The mop dripped water onto the shining floor, but Daniel didn't care. His eyes locked on the executives, waiting for them to speak, to move, to do anything. But none of them did. They just stared at him in shock, their jaws still hanging open. The room was heavy with silence after Daniel's voice faded. The alien executives stared at him, their eyes sharp, their faces pale with disbelief. One of them finally spoke, his tone sharp and angry, demanding to know how a low human janitor could speak their ancient language so fluently. Daniel did not flinch. He stood straight, mop still in hand, his voice calm but firm. He told them he had no interest in their secrets. But he could not stay silent when he heard them planning to harm innocent workers. The tallest executive, with silver markings on his skin, stepped closer. His eyes narrowed as he spoke slowly in their tongue, testing Daniel. He used a complicated phrase, one only scholars or leaders would know. Daniel answered with ease, his reply not only correct, but carrying the right cultural meaning behind the words. A murmur spread among the aliens, disbelief turning into a mix of fear and curiosity. Another executive challenged him, throwing out rare proverbs and ancient metaphors. Daniel answered each one, his voice steady, his tone carrying respect but also quiet defiance. The aliens could not believe it. No human had ever spoken so perfectly, not even diplomats who trained for years. It was as if this janitor had lived among them, studied their ancestors, and carried their history inside him. Daniel's heart beat fast, but he kept his face calm. He remembered the years when he first learned these words, back when he was younger and desperate to survive. Long ago, before Emily was born, Daniel had been a soldier. He was sent to the front lines in a war humans barely understood. His unit was wiped out, and he was captured by aliens who should have killed him. But instead of ending his life, they kept him alive in a prison camp. It was there, surrounded by their voices every day, that he began to learn. He listened when they argued, when they prayed, when they sang old songs. He repeated the words in his mind until he could whisper them in secret. Years passed, and slowly he became fluent, not just in their words, but in their culture. He understood the rhythm of their speech, the weight of their silence, the way meaning hid behind tone. But he never told anyone. Even when the war ended and he returned home, he locked that knowledge away. He feared people would see him as strange, or worse, as a traitor. He wanted only to live quietly, raise Emily, and forget the horrors of war. So he took simple jobs, low jobs, until he became a janitor in this very building. Now his secret stood exposed in front of powerful aliens. They asked again how he knew so much, and Daniel gave no explanation. He only told them he listened, he remembered, and he survived. His eyes were steady, and for a moment, none of them dared to speak again. Finally, one alien whispered to the others, "If a janitor can understand us, how many more can?" Fear rippled through them. Their language was their strongest weapon, their hidden shield. If humans could speak it, then the balance of power might shift. Another executive shook his head and declared Daniel was dangerous. He called him a spy, an infiltrator planted to destroy them from within. His hand moved as if to signal the guards. But Lady Sarath, the only woman among them, raised her hand sharply to stop him. She was tall, with emerald eyes that gleamed like fire, her robe brighter than the rest. Her voice was calm, but carried authority. She said Daniel was not a spy. No spy would choose to mop floors and stay silent for years. She said he was something different, something new. She leaned closer, studying him like a rare puzzle. Her words were not insults, but curiosity, and Daniel could feel her eyes digging into him, searching for his true story. The council began to argue among themselves, voices sharp, words cutting across each other. Some wanted to punish him immediately, to make an example out of him so no other human would dare to rise. Others whispered that maybe he could be useful, that maybe this man could serve a greater purpose. Daniel stood silently, his thoughts drifting for a moment to Emily. He wondered if he had just risked everything. If they decided he was a spy, he might never see her again. His silence did not weaken him. Instead, it made the executives uneasy. His calm face, his quiet refusal to explain fully, only deepened the mystery around him. He had answered every test, spoken every word flawlessly, yet offered no story to satisfy their doubts. Lady Sereth broke the tension. She stepped forward and asked Daniel directly if he was willing to use his gift for something greater than cleaning floors. Her voice was gentle but dangerous, like a blade wrapped in silk. She said his talents could change not just his life, but the lives of all humans working under alien rule. Daniel did not answer right away. His mind raced. He had always wanted to protect his daughter, to give her more than a life of scraps and struggle. But he also knew danger when he saw it, and this offer carried more danger than anything before. He could see the envy in the other executives' eyes. If he said yes, he would be pulled into their games. If he said no, they might silence him forever. The silence stretched until one alien slammed his hand against the table, demanding that Daniel speak. At that moment, Daniel lifted his head, his voice steady once again. He told them their insults no longer mattered. He told them he was not afraid of being invisible anymore. What he had heard tonight was wrong, and if speaking their tongue was the only way to defend his people, then he would not stop. The room fell silent again. For the second time that night, the janitor had stolen the voice of an entire council. They looked at each other with a mixture of fear and wonder. And Daniel, though his heart was heavy, felt for the first time that his silence all those years had been waiting for this very moment. The council chamber still buzzed with whispers after Daniel's bold words. The aliens sat high on their seats, their glowing eyes watching him as though he were both dangerous and fascinating. He stood still, mop still leaning against his leg, his mind heavy with thoughts of his daughter waiting at home. He had not planned for any of this, but now the secret he had buried for years was out, and there was no way to push it back into the dark. Lady Sereth rose from her chair. Her long robe shimmered under the cold blue lights as she walked closer to him. The other executives fell silent. She looked him over slowly, as though studying a rare creature no one else understood. Her lips curled into the faintest smile. She said his life of sweeping floors had ended the moment he opened his mouth in their tongue. She said he now had a choice: stay silent and be crushed by those who feared him, or step forward and claim a place far greater than he ever imagined. Daniel did not trust her smile. He could hear the sharpness in her voice, like honey covering poison. He asked her what kind of place she meant. Her answer came smooth and quick. She said the council needed someone who could bridge the gap between their people and humans. She said his skills could be used for diplomacy. The word sounded sweet, but Daniel knew enough to hear the danger behind it. Diplomacy meant power, and power meant enemies. If he accepted, he would no longer just be a janitor. He would be a piece on a chessboard he did not control. The other executives did not hide their suspicion. One of them leaned forward and hissed that Sereth was foolish. A human could never be trusted. Another snapped that this man should be silenced before he spread his knowledge to others. Their voices clashed, rising louder with every second, until Sereth lifted her hand and quiet returned. Her emerald eyes burned as she looked straight at Daniel and told him to consider carefully. Then she dismissed the meeting, her tone sharp with finality. Guards moved toward him, tall and armored, their weapons hidden but their hands ready. Daniel knew this was not a request. He had been marked, chosen, whether he liked it or not. As they escorted him out of the chamber, he glanced back at the council. Their faces were shadows of mixed greed, fear, and calculation. He understood in that moment that he was not free anymore. He was now something valuable, and valuable things were always watched. The long halls of the building seemed darker than before as he walked with the guards. The polished walls reflected his tired face, the face of a man who only wanted a simple life. He thought about Emily. She was probably sitting by the window waiting for him, maybe with a half-finished drawing in her hand, maybe with leftover food she had saved for him. Every step away from the council room felt like he was walking deeper into a trap, but he had no choice. Outside, the air was cool, the city lights glowing against the alien night sky. The guards stopped at the gate, their eyes never leaving him. One of them spoke coldly, telling him Lady Sereth would call for him soon. The warning was clear. He was under their watch now. If he tried to run, if he tried to resist, His daughter would pay the price. Daniel nodded without a word and walked home, the weight of invisible chains pressing down on him. On the streets, ordinary humans passed by, tired workers carrying tools and bags. They didn't know what had just happened behind the walls of the alien tower. They didn't know that one of their own had stood tall in front of the council. Daniel wanted to feel proud, but instead, fear ate at him. Knowledge was power, but power always came with a cost. He feared that cost would land on Emily's small shoulders. The walk home felt longer than usual. Every shadow made him tense. Every strange sound made him glance behind. He felt eyes on him, even when no one was there. The aliens would not let him walk free so easily. He was marked now, not only by Serath's interest, but by the council's suspicion. When he finally reached the small apartment, he stood at the door for a long moment, breathing slowly, forcing his hands to stop shaking. He wanted to push the memory of the chamber away before Emily saw his face. He opened the door and found her awake, sitting cross-legged on the old couch, a book in her lap. She looked up and smiled, her eyes lighting with joy just because her father had come home. He smiled back, forcing calm into his voice. She asked if he was tired. He nodded and told her yes, more tired than usual. She jumped up and handed him a plate with bread she had saved. He sat down, watching her chatter about her day at school, her laughter soft and pure. He wanted to lose himself in her words, but part of his mind remained in the council room, where Lady Serath's eyes had burned into him, where whispers had marked him as dangerous. Emily leaned against him, asking if things would ever get better, if he would ever find a better job than cleaning. He kissed her head and told her someday soon, yes. But in his heart, he knew his life had already changed forever. The aliens had seen his secret, and now there was no turning back. As Emily drifted to sleep, Daniel went to the window and looked out. The city stretched under the alien sky, towers glowing red and blue. On a rooftop not far away, a faint light blinked. A small surveillance drone, hovering silently, watching his home. Daniel's stomach tightened. They were already keeping him under guard. He closed the curtain slowly, his mind heavy with fear and resolve. He had wanted to stay invisible forever. But now his words had dragged him into the open. He was no longer just a janitor. He was a man caught between two worlds, and the choice Lady Serath had offered was not a gift. It was the beginning of something dangerous, something that could destroy him or change everything. Daniel unlocked the door carefully, his hands still tense from the walk through the city. The hinges creaked as he stepped inside the small apartment, and the familiar smell of old wood and cooking oil wrapped around him. The place was not much, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but to him, it was a world because Emily lived here. He found her sitting on the floor with her school books spread out, her little head bent low as she tried to copy letters by candlelight. The single light bulb above them flickered again, threatening to go out completely. She looked up as soon as he entered, her tired face brightening instantly. "Daddy," she said, rushing to him. Daniel forced a smile and crouched down to hug her tightly. The weight of the council, the dangerous eyes of Lady Serath, the silent drones in the sky, all of it faded for a short moment when his daughter's arms wrapped around his neck. He smelled the faint scent of her hair, and he held her longer than usual. Emily pulled back and studied his face. She was too young, but she could sense when something troubled him. Her small fingers touched his cheek. "You look worried again," she whispered. Daniel laughed softly, shaking his head. He told her he was just tired, nothing more. She didn't believe him, but she nodded anyway and pulled him toward the table where she had kept food ready. It was simple, just bread and a little soup, but she had saved it for him. He sat down, and she sat across from him, watching every bite as though making sure he ate enough. Daniel smiled faintly, knowing she had probably eaten less, so he could have more. He told her she must not skip food, and she giggled, promising she hadn't. He didn't push, though in his heart he knew she had lied for his sake. After the meal, Emily showed him a drawing she had made with cheap crayons on old paper. It was of them standing together under a sun. She had drawn him taller, with a big smile, and herself holding his hand. In the background, she had drawn a house that looked much larger than the one they lived in now. Daniel's throat tightened, and he nodded, telling her it was beautiful. She said someday they would live in a house like that, and she would have her own big room. He promised her they would. But when she went back to her books, Daniel's eyes drifted to the cracked window. Outside, he saw it again, a faint blinking red light floating in the night sky. A surveillance drone hovered not too far away, almost hidden between buildings. His chest grew heavy. They were watching even now, even here in his home. He quickly pulled the curtain closed before Emily noticed. He sat near her, pretending to check her homework. His mind, however, was far away. He remembered the cold look in the eyes of the council, the way Lady Serath had spoken with a sharp edge hidden under kindness. He could not tell Emily about it, not yet. She was only a child, and she carried enough weight already. But his silence did not erase the danger that pressed closer with every passing moment. Later that night, Emily yawned and rubbed her eyes. He carried her to the small bed in the corner, tucking her under the thin blanket. She clung to his shirt and mumbled, asking if he would be safe at work tomorrow. Daniel stroked her hair gently and promised he would be fine. She whispered goodnight, her voice fading as she drifted into sleep. Daniel sat by her side for a while, watching her chest rise and fall. Her innocence gave him strength, but also filled him with fear. She was the reason he worked, the reason he endured humiliation, the reason he had stayed invisible for so long. But now everything had changed. The aliens had seen him, heard him, and marked him. And if anything happened to him, Emily would be left alone in this harsh city. He stood up quietly and went to the kitchen window again. Pulling the curtain aside just a little, he looked out into the street below. The drone was still there, silent and patient, its red light blinking like an unblinking eye. He cursed under his breath and closed the curtain again, his jaw tight. He leaned against the wall, rubbing his tired face with both hands. He thought of leaving the city, running away with Emily to somewhere the aliens had less control. But he knew it was useless. Their reach stretched far beyond these streets, their eyes in every corner. He could not outrun them. The only way forward was through, and that thought filled him with dread. Hours passed, but he could not sleep. He sat by the table, staring at Emily's drawing of the house with the big sun, and wondered if she would ever see that dream come true. The paper trembled slightly in his hands as he realized he might soon have to choose between keeping silent for her safety or stepping deeper into the storm to give her a better life. The city outside was quiet, but he felt the tension pressing in, the sense that invisible chains had already wrapped around his life. Somewhere beyond the night sky, Lady Serath was already planning her next move. Somewhere in the council chambers, powerful voices were debating what to do with him. And somewhere in the shadows, unseen eyes tracked every step he made. Daniel touched Emily's picture again, the same one he always carried in his pocket. He whispered to himself that he would not let them hurt her, no matter what it cost him. The promise gave him strength, but the fear never left his chest. He knew tomorrow would bring new choices, new dangers, and that the life of silence he once lived was gone forever. As the candle burned low and shadows stretched across the walls, Daniel sat awake, listening to the faint hum of the drone outside. His daughter slept peacefully, dreaming of brighter suns and bigger houses. But Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the window, alert and unblinking, because he knew the night was no longer safe. The next morning came heavy and slow. Daniel had not slept more than a few minutes. His eyes burned with exhaustion. But he forced himself up, careful not to wake Emily, who was still curled under the thin blanket. He washed his face with cold water from the small basin, trying to clear his mind. Today, he had to return to the alien headquarters. Lady Serath's words from the night before still rang in his head. It was not a request. It was an order hidden inside an invitation. He walked through the streets, keeping his head down, but he felt the same weight pressing on his back, as if eyes were following him every step. He glanced up once and spotted a drone hovering far behind. He cursed softly under his breath, but kept moving. The city was alive with noise. Humans rushing to their jobs, alien officers giving sharp orders, machines groaning as they lifted heavy cargo. No one paid attention to him, yet he felt like everyone could see the truth he was hiding. When he reached the massive tower, the guards were already waiting. They did not greet him like a worker. Their eyes were sharp, their posture tense, as though they were escorting a prisoner. They led him into the building without a word, their footsteps echoing down the long metallic corridor. Daniel's chest grew tight. He thought of Emily's smile that morning, the way she had whispered, "Come back safe," before drifting into sleep again. He clenched his fists. He had to return to her. The guards brought him to a large hall, brighter and more intimidating than the council chamber. Here, alien elders sat in a semicircle, their robes heavy with golden embroidery. Their faces were calm, but their eyes were sharp, scanning him as if they were looking into his soul. At the center stood Lady Serath, her emerald eyes gleaming. She smiled faintly, though Daniel could tell it was the kind of smile that never reached her heart. One of the elders stood and explained why Daniel was brought here. They wanted to test him. They wanted proof that his words the other night were not tricks or luck. They wanted to see if this human truly understood their sacred tongue, their history, their culture. If he failed, the punishment would be severe. Daniel swallowed hard but nodded. He could not show fear, not here. They handed him a tablet filled with old writings. The symbols glowed faintly, sharp and complex. These were not common words. They were sacred texts no human had ever been allowed to see. The elder told him to read. Daniel's eyes scanned the lines, and the memories came rushing back. He remembered the prison camp years ago, when he had secretly watched guards read prayers and commanders write orders. He remembered how he whispered the strange words under his breath until they became clear in his mind. Now, standing in front of the most powerful aliens in the building, he spoke. His voice was calm and steady as he read the lines. He did not just pronounce the words correctly. He explained their meaning, their hidden stories, the way each phrase tied to their traditions. Gasps filled the hall. The aliens leaned forward, listening in disbelief. The elders exchanged glances, some whispering to each other. Lady Serath's smile grew sharper. When Daniel finished, silence filled the room. One elder finally nodded, admitting that no human could have spoken so perfectly unless he truly understood. Another muttered that perhaps humans were not as weak and simple as they believed, but not all were convinced. An elder with deep scars across his cheek stood abruptly, his voice filled with anger. He accused Daniel of being a spy. He shouted that no janitor, no human worker could know so much without secret training. He demanded Daniel be executed before he spread his knowledge to others. The guards stepped forward at once, their weapons ready. Daniel's heart pounded. He could feel the cold steel of danger brushing against his skin. He thought of Emily again, her small voice asking if he would be safe. He wanted to close his eyes and disappear, but he forced himself to stay strong. Lady Serath raised her hand sharply, stopping the guards. She turned to the angry elder, her voice calm but firm. She said killing him would be foolish. If Daniel was a spy, then keeping him alive would be even more valuable. They could use him, test him, and control him. Her words were smooth but dangerous, and Daniel realized she was not protecting him out of kindness. She was protecting her own interest. The elders debated loudly, their voices clashing across the hall. Some said Daniel was dangerous and should be silenced forever. Others whispered that perhaps he was a gift, a bridge between two worlds, someone who could give them an advantage over humans. The air grew heavy with tension, and Daniel stood in the middle, silent, waiting for their decision. Finally, the council's leader raised his hand, and the hall went quiet. His voice was deep and heavy with authority. He said Daniel had proven his knowledge. He said the janitor had become something greater than his station. He would not be killed for now. Instead, he would serve as a translator, a link between their people and the humans. But if he ever betrayed them, if he ever failed, the punishment would be worse than death. The guards stepped back, lowering their weapons. Daniel's chest loosened slightly, but fear still clung to him. He knew what this meant. He was no longer free. He was bound to them now, trapped in their games of power. Lady Serath gave him a knowing look, her smile thin and sharp like a blade. As he was escorted out of the hall, Daniel's mind raced. He had survived the test, but survival was not victory. He was now caught between danger and opportunity, between trust and suspicion. And above all, he knew one thing with painful clarity. If he made a single mistake, not only his life but Emily's life would be destroyed. He walked out of the grand hall, his steps heavy, his heart torn. He had proven himself, but at what cost? Daniel sat in a smaller chamber now, the guards posted at the door like silent statues. His body was still tense from the trial, but he forced himself to sit straight. The council had left him alive, but their eyes had burned into him with suspicion. Lady Serath entered the room after a while, her steps graceful, her robe whispering across the floor. She smiled at him, though the smile was sharp, not warm. She told him calmly that he had impressed the elders, but she wanted to see something more. She placed a new device on the table between them, its surface glowing with alien symbols. It was not just language now. It was codes, orders, contracts, things no ordinary human could ever hope to understand. She pushed it toward him and asked him to explain what was written. Daniel studied the glowing lines, and slowly his eyes widened. These were not just cultural proverbs or religious texts. These were military orders, contracts of war, and instructions for how resources were to be moved secretly. For a moment, he hesitated. Reading these aloud could mark him as more dangerous than ever. But he knew he could not step back now. His voice was calm as he spoke, explaining line by line. He told her which words were hidden commands, which were threats disguised as promises, which were agreements written to trap weaker planets into surrender. Lady Serath's eyes gleamed as she listened. The more he explained, the sharper her smile became. She saw something in him that even the council hadn't fully realized. He wasn't just a translator of words, he was a reader of power. Daniel leaned back finally, his voice trailing into silence. He could see how dangerous his own knowledge was. These were secrets that could shift wars. If the council knew just how much he understood, they would kill him at once. Serath clapped her hands slowly, calling him remarkable. She said no human diplomat, no human scholar, not even the best spies had ever come close to what he had just done. She leaned forward, lowering her voice, telling him he was more valuable than half the council combined. Daniel's stomach twisted. He had wanted to be invisible all his life, but now he was a target, painted bright for all to see. He told her he wanted nothing to do with their politics, their wars. He said he only wanted to earn enough to care for his daughter. Serath's smile softened, though Daniel knew it was another mask. She said that was exactly why he could not escape. A man with a daughter was easier to control than a soldier with no ties. Her words cut deep, but Daniel stayed silent. He realized she had studied him as carefully as he had studied their language. She knew Emily existed, and that knowledge gave her a weapon sharper than any blade. She could destroy him with a single order, or worse, destroy the only person he lived for. The guards escorted him back through the halls, but this time heads turned. Alien workers, lesser officials, even some human staff looked at him differently. A rumor was already spreading about the janitor who had spoken like a scholar, who had stood against the elders without fear. Whispers followed him like shadows. Some carried awe, others carried hatred. The weight of it pressed heavier than the mop he once pushed across these same floors. That night, back at the apartment, Daniel sat by the table with Emily, trying to act as though nothing had changed. She told him about her school day, about how one of her friends shared half a piece of candy, and how she wanted to draw a picture of him again. He smiled and nodded, but his mind was far away, still hearing Serath's voice telling him he was more valuable than half the council. He knew now he could not keep Emily safe simply by staying quiet. Silence was no longer an option. When Emily finally fell asleep, Daniel stayed awake, staring at the shadows on the wall. He replayed everything in his head. He had revealed too much. By showing them he could read their codes and orders, he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. He was no longer just a janitor with a hidden skill. He was a man holding knowledge that could topple powers, and that made him dangerous to everyone, human and alien alike. The following day, Serath summoned him again, but not to the council. This time it was to her private chamber. She dismissed the guards and spoke to him directly. She told him she wanted to use his talent to shape the future, to rise higher than the rest of the council. She promised him protection, food, and safety for his daughter if he stood by her. Her words flowed like silk, each one carefully chosen. Daniel felt the weight of her offer. It was not a choice. It was a chain disguised as a gift. He asked her what would happen if he refused. Her eyes grew colder. She said refusal was not an option. She leaned closer, whispering that his daughter's name was already known to the council and that children without protection often disappeared in the city. The threat was clear, sharp, and heavy. Daniel clenched his fists under the table, rage burning inside him, but he kept his face calm. He realized then that he was no longer simply caught in their game. He was the game. Sarath had seen what no one else had, a human who could walk through their words like a knife through paper, a man who carried in his head the kind of power most of them feared. She would use him, control him, and if she couldn't, she would destroy him. When he left her chamber, he knew life would never return to what it had been. He was no longer a janitor in the shadows. He was a man who had revealed too much, who carried a secret that could shake empires. And though fear clung to him, another feeling stirred deep inside. A quiet strength, a thought he had never dared to believe before. Maybe, just maybe, his knowledge could protect Emily, not just endanger her. Maybe his voice, once hidden, could one day be used not for their control, but for humanity's freedom. The thought burned like a small flame inside his chest as he walked home. But even as he touched Emily's picture in his pocket, he knew the fire would draw attention, and attention in this world always came with a cost. The council chamber was full again, the air heavy with tension. Daniel stood in the center, his shoulders straight, though his chest carried the weight of fear. Around him, the elders argued with voices that echoed like thunder. Some wanted him silenced forever. Others whispered about the power he could bring if they used him wisely. Lady Sarath sat calm among them, her emerald eyes fixed on him, a faint smile curving her lips as though she already knew how this would end. Daniel listened as they debated, every word sharp, every sentence reminding him that his fate was not his own. He thought of Emily waiting at home, her small hands coloring pictures of suns and houses. He could not let these aliens take away her chance at life. When the noise grew too loud, Daniel finally raised his hand. His voice was steady as he spoke in their language, the words rolling out with calm authority. He told them he would not serve blindly. If they wanted his help, then they must protect the humans who worked under them. The room froze. No human had ever dared to speak to the council like this. He was not begging, not asking softly. He was demanding. His voice carried the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose except his child. The elders shifted in their seats, some outraged, some impressed. Lady Sarath leaned forward, her smile widening. She asked what he wanted in return for his service. Daniel's answer came without hesitation. He wanted safety for all Earthworkers. No more cruel cuts, no more hunger, no more abuse. He said humans deserved dignity, and if the council refused, then they could kill him now because he would never help them. His words echoed through the hall, sharp as a blade. Silence followed. The elders stared at him, unsure whether to punish or reward such boldness. Finally, the leader of the council, older than the rest, lifted his hand. His deep voice filled the chamber. He said this human had shown not just knowledge, but courage. Courage was a quality they respected, even if it came from someone they once saw as beneath them. He declared that Daniel would serve as translator and cultural advisor, a bridge between species. In return, the council would grant protections for Earthworkers, written into their agreements. A ripple of shock spread through the chamber. Some protested loudly, shouting that a janitor had no right to make demands. But the leader's voice silenced them again. His word was final. Daniel had not just survived, he had changed the shape of the conversation forever. Lady Sarath's eyes glittered as she looked at him. She had gotten what she wanted. Daniel placed in a position of importance, tied to her power. Yet even she seemed surprised that he had gained something for his people. For the first time, humans were not spoken about like cattle. They were given recognition. The guards escorted Daniel out, but this time their hands did not grip their weapons so tightly. They looked at him with curiosity, even respect. As he walked through the shining halls, whispers followed him again, but now they were different. No longer was he just the janitor who surprised the council. Now he was the human who had stood tall and forced aliens to listen. That night, when Daniel returned to his small apartment, Emily was waiting by the window. She jumped into his arms as soon as he opened the door, her laughter filling the room. He hugged her tightly, breathing in the warmth of her small body, feeling the weight of the day melt away for a moment. She asked if work had been hard. He smiled faintly and told her yes, but it was better now. He did not tell her the details. She was too young to understand, but he promised her things would change, and for once he believed it. Emily showed him another drawing. This time, she had drawn him not with a mop, but standing tall in front of a group of aliens. She had drawn herself beside him, smiling proudly. Daniel stared at the picture for a long time, his throat tightening. He asked her how she thought of this. She giggled and said she dreamed he was important, not just a cleaner. He kissed her forehead and told her maybe her dream was true. Later that night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Daniel stood at the window, looking out into the city. The drone was still there, watching, its red light blinking softly. He did not feel fear this time. He knew they would keep watching him, trying to control him. But he also knew something had shifted. The council had listened to him. His voice, once hidden in silence, now carried weight. He was no longer invisible. He touched the picture Emily had drawn, then the old folded one he carried in his pocket. His daughter was his reason, his strength, his anchor. The aliens had thought they owned the galaxy, that their words were beyond human reach. But tonight they had learned something new. A janitor, a single father with tired hands and weary eyes, had spoken their sacred tongue and forced them to bend. He whispered to himself that this was only the beginning. He knew there would be danger ahead, betrayals and games of power. Lady Serath would try to use him, enemies would try to silence him, and the council would never fully trust him. But he also knew he had something they did not, a reason to fight beyond pride or ambition. He had Emily, and through her, he had hope. As the city lights flickered in the distance, Daniel felt the future pressing down on him like a storm. But instead of shrinking away, he stood taller. The mop was gone, replaced by a new role, a new voice, a new weight. He was not just a janitor anymore. He was a man who had stepped into the fire and come out standing. The aliens thought they had claimed him, but in truth, he had claimed something too. The right to be heard, the right to protect, the right to change everything. And though the night was quiet, he felt it deep in his chest. The world had shifted, and nothing would ever be the same again.